All right, so welcome to podcast number 1 of what I am calling the Wundercast. Obviously, as you know, my name's Brock Wunder, and I kind of want to keep this as informal as possible, as raw as possible. I do have some notes just to make sure we stay on track. But really, I want this to be almost like informal discussions. I'm going to have video versions of these and audio versions of these anywhere that you can really listen to podcasts. Obviously, I want the primary one to be Spotify. So if you are listening to it on there, thanks for listening. In today's video, we are going to not only introduce something that is super interesting to me and super passionate, or a topic I'm super passionate about, but we're just going to talk a little bit about the pod, what I want to do on the podcast. And obviously, if you have any suggestions for the pod, please let me know, because this is a space where I want to basically talk about how to live a creative life that's not only good for us, but also for the planet. I've thought about this a lot, and it's always been sort of like a mission for me on how can we actually just integrate sustainability into whatever our daily lives are. And if you've been following me since, I'm going to say 2018, 2019, you'll know that the environment is something that I'm super passionate about. I studied the environment and business. It was like a hybrid topic degree, not a double degree, but we covered both in university. And doing street photography and sharing street photography isn't necessarily something that really is like capable of showing the environment. So this is kind of my way of wanting to bridge that gap. But I want the basis of this podcast to be about something that I mentioned in some of my recent videos, which is this idea that we all need a habit for creativity, for health, and for wealth in order to live a fulfilling life. And what's interesting to me about what I'm calling this like idea triangle, or this habit triangle for balance, is that sustainability or just caring about the environment can be wrapped into these 3 sort of cornerstones of what makes life actually, like, not necessarily interesting, but in a way aligns us with a central mission or a why. And that's what we're basically going to be talking about in this video, is how to live a purposeful life, and how I've been sort of figuring out how to live a purposeful life based on being very choosy, if I'm being quite honest, in these 3 specific aspects of my life, and what things fit into these sort of content buckets that are like, topic buckets that we can basically continue to practice. So if you are listening to this podcast, I just want to say thanks, appreciate it. This is episode 1 of the Wundercast, and we're basically in the future going to be breaking down topics around sustainability, the environment, and different things of that nature that can help us basically live a purposeful life, and one that we actually want to be excited to wake up in the morning and achieve our goals with, and also one that can basically drive positive change in the world by tackling difficult problems or just difficult things in general, whether it's an athletic pursuit, something that, if you're running an ultra marathon or powerlifting, how can that benefit the environment? I know it sounds crazy, but we're going to figure it out. I think I have an idea on how to communicate this. Or, working in our daily jobs. Maybe we have a job that's not related to sustainability whatsoever, or caring for the planet and climate change, and sort of maybe a higher mission towards us. And this is the podcast that is going to talk about how to figure that out, and how to design habits to basically make sure that every day we can have those sort of little wins that can inch us towards those goals. So with that, we're just basically going to go into saying that I'm not really perfect. I don't think anybody's perfect, but I want to just share that sort of raw emotional aspect of life. And so take this with a grain of salt. Obviously, I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but this is just sort of my perspective. This podcast is my sort of experience so far in these 25 years of life. In about a week, I turned 26. So it's gotten me a little bit introspective, but really this is an adventure on how to integrate eco-conscious behaviors into basically everything that we do, and leveling up our personality. So let's jump into what we are trying to accomplish. If you are watching the video format, you'll see me glance off to the right, and that's just me checking my notes to make sure we stay on track. And if you are listening to the audio one, sit back, relax. We're going to get right into it. But a little bit of backstory. I figure episode 1, talk about a little bit of the motivation going on here. And hopefully it's a relatable experience to some of you that maybe also came up in a similar way to me, where we got barraged growing up with climate change information or general information around literally saving the planet, given that we were the generation that had been charged with cleaning up the mess of older generations. Obviously, no fault on their own. I actually think that older generations get a bad rap for being wasteful. They didn't know. It was just how to live life. And so I excuse them maybe more than other people do. Obviously, that's a hot topic and debated extensively, but that's where I'm at. And we can get into that, I'm sure, on a separate podcast. But really, on that note, I've kind of always been obsessed with this idea of there being this like existential threat. And I picked my university degree on that sort of notion that there's no other important issue facing us other than climate change. You know, you can look at, again, like maybe at risk of not upsetting people, but that's where I stand. I fundamentally believe that climate change is the most important thing on this planet that needs to be addressed. And without addressing that, nothing else can be fixed. And why I say that is because when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they don't just say we have to remove carbon from the atmosphere. If it was that simple, they talk about poverty. They talk about water resource management. They talk about oceans. They talk about social issues. And what we're seeing right now is a combination of issues that, when looked at in isolation, don't appear connected. But from where I'm sitting and from my degree and my education, with that unique sort of experience of taking like a social sciences and business related environmental degree, something that's very unconventional in the business world where all we care about is profit. I see it as related in that respect, that like everything is connected to climate change and sustainability issues in some way. And you can make the case that the social issues we're seeing are actually sustainability problems just as much as the environmental issues are actually sustainability problems. And I think that that is absolutely fascinating. And again, something that I want to really dig deep on in this podcast. So that is basically what we're going to be accomplishing here is, what are the issues we're facing? How can we actually tangibly do something about it? I think a lot of times we get a lot of information kind of barraged at us, and it's like, great, what am I going to do about this? like I'm only one person. And while it's nice to see these sort of eco-conscious behaviors, no waste movement, plastic revolution, these are really minor steps to kind of take control of the chaos, I think, and not actually long-term solutions. I think that they're a great way to raise awareness and great education, but banning plastic straws or making our own toothpaste will only get us so far. And that's not to say, like, I don't knock anybody who's doing that. I'm personally not making my own toothpaste with baking soda. But I respect the ambition to get control of the uncontrollable in this instance, because every little bit truly does count in some respect. So, careers in saving the planet. I think let's start there. And if there are any careers in saving the planet, I think really in my degree and growing up, it was always a conversation about nonprofits. Greenpeace or Sea Shepherd were like the easiest, quickest thing that you could think of when you thought like, what do I want to do when I'm older? How can I contribute to what I'm learning towards? And it was, well, join Greenpeace. You know what I mean? Or like, oh, join Sea Shepherd. Go down, save the whales, tangibly, physically save the whales, go do beach cleanups with X nonprofit. Again, all great initiatives, but I believe in systems thinking and looking at things on really, like, it sounds taboo, on sustainable solutions to problems. And a beach cleanup is not a sustainable solution. Doing beach cleanups is not sustainable. It is a not performative measure, but it is an active measure that needs maintenance. And based on that definition, it's not sustainable. The acts of sustainability and cleaning up the environment need to have their own momentum. It's not to say they're not necessary and that they're not going to be continued to be done in a way, but really what I want to explore is how can you build business cases around beach cleanups, because that's what makes something continue in perpetuity. That's what gives something inertia. And that was probably my biggest takeaway of my university degree is how do you make sustainability profitable? What is the incentive towards sustainability? And at the time of my studies, there really was no answer. I actually think that there is no answer today, really. You can look at a company like Tentree, obviously shout out, not sponsored given this is episode 1. But they're replacing cotton fabrics with hemp, which is something that's super admirable. But why it's still not a sustainable solution, because you're still needing to support or what's the right way to say this? It's still using water to a certain extent. It's a better solution than cotton. It's a systems approach to cotton, but cotton is clothing as much as it is like what is clothes? Cotton, polyester, wasteful fabrics. And so what's the pathway then towards developing sustainable solutions that maybe hemp becomes the face of the fashion industry? Maybe it's some sort of other fabric that becomes the face of the fashion industry. And that's why I really respect companies like Tentree, is because they continue to waste in the pursuit of better, and we're slowly getting there. Not that I admire wasting, but I think I communicated the point there in a way that kind of supports the idea I'm trying to put out. So on that note, essentially, I think we need to think more practically about saving the planet, and looking at living a life that is thoughtful and not sort of caught up in the rhythm of consumption. There's a lot of backlash on social media about consumerism, about capitalism, about the patriarchy, about all these sort of things. And I'm not saying they're not well-founded, but I think what I am saying is there are topics that are extremes. And then there are sort of piecemeal approaches or immediate fixes that are not as extreme that we can implement into our lives through changing daily habits that are a lot more digestible for people. And that's, again, what I want to focus on. So looking at what is the easy thing, what is the low-hanging fruit, what is the small step that we can do every day to make our way towards sustainability change, rather than that giant leap of, I'm going to live a zero waste lifestyle. And I want to get into that on a separate podcast on my thoughts about zero waste lifestyles. But that's just one example. So really, this is a podcast journey and a video journey about the potential, about human capabilities, and what are we actually possible, or what is possible for us in solving the climate crisis. What are the actions that we can bring to the table? It's about our broader societal contributions towards sustainability. And then, of course, if you are informed a bit about the space, again, you'll know that this isn't going to only be about removing carbon, but broader human habits. So this is where we go then on what makes a human life. What are the activities we do on a daily basis? And why I like this quote, the quote that I was kind of referencing at the beginning is, to live a fulfilling life, you need those 3 habits: creativity, health, and wealth. And in a simple sense, these 3 topics make up a human life. And the mission is, how do we get these 3 topics to be sustainable? And you can carve them out because inevitably, I think the human pursuit is to live a meaningful life. That's what we strive to do. What is our impact on the world? Now, the challenge of what we're about to come to, and really the barrier of solving how to live a meaningful life, might come to a stop in the near future. Why? Is because climate change is going to become such an issue. So how do you live a meaningful, sustainable life? Because there will be no other option than to live sustainably. And it's similar around the conversations around business. Having green business practices won't just be a nice to have, it will be a necessity. Business will be sustainable at some point, whether it's regulated that way or we're forced to change given extreme climate conditions that we have to endure. And so basically we want to look at the fact that we're not robots and we can't just take specific actions prescribed to us, but we have to ebb and flow within the confines of these 3 habits. So we need to allow ourselves to care about the planet, and that's predicated on finding what we care most about in these 3 triangles. What do we care most about in the habits of that triangle? And figuring out how to inch our way towards sustainability. So this podcast is really about how can we become, the best version of ourselves in order to contribute positively towards meaningful causes. And those meaningful causes living under the idea of sustainability, the common thread. And the real question is, are our actions enough? Or should we rely on somebody else for the challenges we face? A lot of people, obviously, zero waste, vegans, vegetarians, people that care about their own consumption and waste. A lot of people in that space kind of get flack because they're like, well, it's industry's problem. Industry's the wasteful ones. When we look at fossil fuels, they emit 83% of global CO2 emissions. If we just switch from fossil fuels and this problem will be over. Or from everything, and that's related to everything in transportation, power, industry, things like steel and cement for industry specifically, looking at inefficient building usage, what are net zero carbon standards, and then even things from agriculture, not even specifically farming, but the cattle and the beef industry and their CO2 emissions from cow burps and cow farts. A hilarious topic, but actually one that is super important to solving. And then really it goes on, well, how can the onus get on us to bring about solutions? And I'm not saying to let's pick an example of living 9 to 5 and saying, well, let's make our 9 to 5 sustainable. I'm saying let's live our lives and try to impact everything more in a systems approach, more on bigger impacts, more on innovation and driving solutions, and still voting with our dollars. That's not something that's invaluable, but really the answers aren't going to come from banning plastic straws. That's not the issue, I think, is the point that I just want to get across. And that's what excites me. Like, let's talk about these big ideas. Let's talk to people that have these big ideas. How can we implement them? How can we bring forth the business case for sustainability? If our world, running off this idea, is inherently driven by consumerism and is capitalist to begin with, how do we bring sustainable capitalism to fruition? Let's accept that we're capitalist driven and change it. So when you look at the numbers and living a zero waste lifestyle, it even kind of brings more of a discussion around things that are not being caused directly from our habits, and the fact that there are technologies that are invented that are circumventing the need to change our habits. Throughout history, pretty much everywhere humans were, we destroyed the landscape. We are wasteful. We have some sort of impact on the environment around us. And I think where I stand on a lot of this, and obviously it ebbs and flows and extremes are extremes, I generally try to find a mediatory approach. But I do believe that technology, if we are going to invest our energy and our time into solving these problems, they need to work with our habits, work with our human nature of waste, and then solve those issues. So really, a zero waste lifestyle is great in the short term, but if we can create biodegradable plastics, if we can create, things that go back into the environment and these circular systems, that's the solution moving forward, because human nature is to waste. The friction caused, especially in countries that are developing, to ask them to be zero waste, like the challenge of that alone is far greater than if we were to, I believe, invest in sustainable products or products that are circular to essentially have that impact lessened. And again, let's talk about it in a separate pod. You can obviously, we can begin debating that now and totally tangent this, but I wanna hear all sides of that argument, because I understand that these arguments are not singular issues and singular perspectives, but let's bring the case forward for how to make this work. And that's what I'm excited about. But back on the triangle, and really what the key message of today's solo podcast is really about how can we now, if we're living a life to be the best versions of ourselves, how can we be happier as a result of picking meaningful activities that help us achieve our goals. So using myself as an example, and hopefully you can do this exercise as well, and we can kind of do this journey together. But we have health as an example for our first sort of triage. What fits under living a healthy life? Obviously first it's fitness, or what I believe lives in a healthy life, and we can add on to it. But fitness, nutrition, sleep, and managing stress, family life, and then of course social activities. And balancing those priorities underneath the bucket of health is already hard as it is. So now how do you make those activities sustainable? Well, let's just pick nutrition and fitness, two of the first ones, given I just got back from the gym, and that's kind of what's on my mind, because lunch is coming up and I'm thinking about my plant-based meal that I want to make for myself. But really it's about changing habits. Like I said, short-term solution or long-term change, like Impossible Meat, Beyond Meat. Obviously we can argue about the health of these products. Long-term, it's undisputable. They want to make these products good for us and the planet. Right now, it's pretty iffy on if they're actually good for us, but what's clear is they are good for the planet. Water consumption's reduced to 32% of actual beef. Tofu swaps, vegan diets versus conventional diets of meat consumption. What's the CO2 impact of that? These are things that we need to think about when living a healthy life. And then obviously getting informed about what a healthy life actually is. If we can have health experts on this podcast, nutritionists that we can talk to about how to actually shape healthy habits, let's do it, and then have the conversation about sustainability along the way. I think that's super exciting. So that's, again, focus of this podcast. The question of these factors becomes one, though, of prioritization and well-being. What is it that motivates us most? And what do we want to focus on in our sort of triangle of balance? It sounds super cheesy, but it is what it is. The truth is there is no right answer. It's up to us to pick what's important to us. But inevitably, I think I just want to get across that in some way, you still need to focus on sustainability to some respect. Even if it's lower on your priority list, it still needs to be there when you're making these considerations on how to live a better life. Then habit around wealth. I think it's interesting because obviously I'm a content creator. I came from a business background. I have a master's of international business, and having that sort of bent and realization of what career paths are possible. Becoming a photographer was so out there for me and something that's very, very unique, but it gave me a very good insight into the fact that your habit for creativity and your habit for wealth can actually be linked. But for most people, your habit for wealth is your 9 to 5. It's your way you're making money. And to accept that sometimes your habit for wealth isn't going to make you happy. Maybe it's a stepping stone. Maybe it's something that you were forced to do. But you can change that, obviously. And that's, again, something that I think we can talk about, is what really is around your habit for wealth and how do you make that journey in of itself successful for you and what you want to achieve. But more importantly, if you're looking for a habit for wealth that brings you happiness, this is where it gets kind of interesting, because often, I'm going to say 80 to 90% of the time, it's going to involve combining your habit for creativity. A lot of people will say that they found their true passion when they learned how to paint, or they learned how to fish, or they learned photography or videography, or these sort of creative habits that you can not only take in isolation, but you can combine to now drive an income forward. And what a lot of people will tell you is the moment you do that, it becomes a job and it's not as fun and whatever. So really the idea about this 3-pillar triangle is that you need to protect your habit for creativity for your own mental well-being. as a street photographer, I've found a ton of benefits on really protecting that time for street photography and recognizing that it's an art form that shouldn't depend or shouldn't like hinge on the other habits of what I have in my life going on. It's its own thing, similar to how fitness can be its own thing. My progress in the gym isn't dependent on anyone else but how I perform in the gym. And it's similar for your habits of creativity. And I'm really excited to talk about that. I think content creators have a lot of very useful insights for people on how to protect your creativity and how to foster your creativity and really take your habit for creativity and bring it into other aspects of your life to also improve those as well. And of course, creative problem solving, the number one thing we need to do for fixing climate change. So really, I think this is a podcast about renewal. It's not only about renewal for ourselves, it's renewal for the planet. And more importantly, it's about developing our creative capabilities to solve complex problems. And what I'm going to leave us with is a last thought from Chase Jarvis, who is a very inspirational content creator. I highly recommend you check out his podcast and read his book, Creative Calling. I read that in 2019 when I kind of began this creative career path in social media and content creation. And he talks a lot about this idea that creativity is a muscle. And in my last YouTube video on street photography, I talked a little bit about this, but how developing your creative muscle is transferable to other aspects of your life. And again, not only from like creative problem solving, but it helps develop good habits. It's that consistency that you want, that you're putting your effort into with your creative habits and bringing that into other aspects of your life. So really check out that book. If there's one recommendation, it's to read Creative Calling by Chase Jarvis and give his podcast a listen. Very insightful for content creators who are looking to make a difference or just content creators that are looking to get started on their journey. I can't recommend it enough. But really, taking this all into consideration, how can we bring sustainability into our lives? How can we live a healthy life that's rich, well-meaning, and then making ourselves better as a result of living our lives and contributing to our inevitable why in life? Why do we want to achieve the things that we do, and how do we want to get them? So with that, I hope this episode kind of showed you the value of fostering your habits for wealth, health, and creativity. I think it's a good exercise to really think about and compartmentalize your life into these three categories and how you want to enable that change in these aspects. And if there's anything to say, it's that I'm excited for what's to come with the podcast. I think this is going to be fun. This is something I wanted to do for a while. And personally, I'm just grateful for the journey, just to kick things off. And obviously this is episode 1 and just leave this as a note here, but street photography has given me a lot and a lot of creative insights. I've met a lot of really cool people that inspire me daily. And I hope that we can connect more closely now with a podcast format and a long form video format, kind of talking about the crazy challenges that we're facing in the world today and how we can all collectively overcome them. So as always, with that, I just want to say thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave the podcast a rating. It does help out a lot getting this kind of out there into the world. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Thanks for giving me your time today.